A dismal silence has fallen over the Opera Epiclese. Mere hours ago, the massive performance hall had been filled with the cheers and applause of an enraptured audience, the seats lined with citizens of the nation of Hydro, Fontaine. They had been gathered to see the renowned magician Linny put on a grand display of magic, but instead they played witness to a grisly murder. And now the stage was crawling with members of the Maison Gardiennage, taking notes for the fast-approaching trial that was all but guaranteed to find Linny guilty of murdering one of his associates. Standing closer to the exit, the accused magician and his twin sister stood side by side, looking concerned. Across from them were the legendary traveler and their travel guide Paimon, both of whom looked equally worried. Despite their best efforts to investigate the crime scene, the evidence they'd turned up was far from exonerating. Instead, it seemed only to point the finger of guilt more squarely in Linny's direction, and as they had volunteered themselves to act as Linny's defense, the adventuring duo was racking their brains to think of what to do next. It was then that an idea occurred to the traveler. Closing her eyes and clasping her hands together, Lumine concentrated on the infinite sky above her, thinking of how the stars had delivered her to the world of Tevat and brought a host of friends and allies to her side. And now, more than ever, a new ally was what she needed, an individual who could help her solve the crime in front of her and prove Linny's innocence. As if responding to her powerful desire, Lumine felt the stars in the sky shift, and someone was pulled across the yawning chasms between dimensions to aid in her plight. To Linny, Lynette, and Paimon's surprise, a young woman dressed in orange appeared next to them in a flash of light, adjusting her black square glasses as she took in the unfamiliar faces before her. Meanwhile, something similar was taking place in a dimension not too different from Lumine's. Here, the otherworldly traveler known as Aether wished on the stars for help, and a man dressed in a blue suit appeared at his side with a blinding flourish, the sharpness of his outfit matched only by his spiky black hair. And so, the events of two different Fontaines would forever be altered by the presence of two individuals from different worlds. Velma Dinkley, Mystery Incorporated's resident brainiac, and Phoenix Wright, the legendary ace attorney. With these interlopers sticking by their respective travelers' sides during the Archon quest line of the nation of Hydro, who would prove to be more helpful in the investigations and trials that await them?
Really? You're my opponent? I was hoping for a challenge, not Professor Layton set on easy mode. I'm Butter Samurai, and I'm here to tell you why Velma Dinkley is going to be much better help to the Traveler during the Fontaine questline. A quick summary for those who don't know. This story has the Traveler defending Linny from the murder of Cowell, solving the disappearing women incident and catching the killer Marcel, then going to the Fortress of Meropide in order to investigate its inner working. Afterwards, coming out to uncover the secret of the Hydron Archon's true identity, and saving everyone from a giant narwhal. There's a lot more context and details, but our debates are already plenty long enough. I highly recommend giving this quest a play or watch if you don't have the summary of it. Definitely worth your time. That aside, let's get to the actual debate. Starting off with the most obvious point. Phoenix can't fight. This guy has as much experience and skill in combat as he does getting laid. And there's a reason his daughter's adopted. Velma may not be throwing hands as well as Batman, but she's seen her fair share of fights and can hold her own, or escape if she gets in any serious danger. Phoenix may be a durable person in the context of his world, but that's only going to go so far when fighting magical and armed creatures. Phoenix is going to be in constant danger from even the most basic enemies. While he has been known for taking some hits through the series, those hits are usually always very blunt, where here, fire, water, magic, and giant axes are coming his way, and little reason to assume he would survive it. The Traveler could watch over him, but that's going to severely slow them down every time they enter combat, and isn't guaranteed Phoenix isn't coming out with any scraps, if his life at all. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't quite have the wallet to stack up on some primo gems for some backup support. While Fontaine is less combat-based in the story, it still exists. They do have to leave into dangerous areas more than once. Meanwhile, Velma has essentially tangled with Satan before. I'm not going to go in some big tangent about Velma being a cosmic being to this verse, and anyone here should beg her for mercy, but given how much she's come across beings able to cause earthquakes or make entirely alternative universes, it clearly shows she's not only seen combat way more, but has dealt with it on a much greater scale with much wackier powers. The perks of being a Hanna-Barbera character. As far as traveling, the only real advantage I'm seeing is Velma being able to use the Wind Glider just by virtue of experience with this kind of stuff, where Phoenix has zero reason to be able to use it. But let's get into the actual cases themselves. Starting with the first case, defending Linny for the murder of Kal-El. I honestly don't see Phoenix or Velma speeding anything up here. Everything said is pretty straightforward, and both are good enough investigators that they aren't missing any evidence. The confession from Lillian is necessary to end the case, who's only found by Navia during the case itself. And when they learn that Linny is part of the Fatui, whether you believe Velma would trust him or not is irrelevant. The mystery alone would be enough to keep her around. And while Phoenix may be a lawyer while Velma isn't, she's plenty smart enough to put the pieces together. Traveler was just a novice and still handled it quite well. Velma may not step in the legal courtroom much, but she's still a crime solver. Anything she might not know could easily be studied in between the gaps of court cases. She has studied history and stories of people all the time. This is nothing new. After this case though, the Traveler actually almost just leaves despite the women's disappearance case being brought up. Where the Traveler may not show any interest at first, Velma absolutely is figuring it out. The gang drives around just looking for mysteries to solve. No way she's going to doodle along back home after all this. Phoenix I could see doing either, honestly. While it is another case, he's still got actual responsibilities at home. Bills, his actual job, or his daughter. Velma has made her life doing this stuff. She's got little to worry about, giving her more ability to stay here longer. Even if you argue that Phoenix is going to stay despite all this means likely that they are sticking with Navia at this point to help her while the Traveler goes along their merry way. Which here comes the first time Phoenix has a huge chance on dying.
Wake up! Come on, hurry! Navia's outnumbered!
Look out!
If Navia, Silver, and my goat Maloose were exhausted just fighting this literal army of robots, they ain't gonna have the easiest time protecting Phoenix. It would be so easy for one Gardamek to catch him off guard when experienced fighters are struggling fighting them. Assuming he even makes it out of there alive, you might think that Phoenix will start to get the advantage once they start to investigate Florent, Thierry, and Marcel, since he has a lie detector. But that saves minutes at best, given that they already think where to check right after talking, and that's assuming that he even catches any lies. Let me tackle the Magatama real quick. A lie detector is great, but by no means is it an end-all be-all item. It's not as useful as you may think. It can make Phoenix aware of a lie, but nothing else. It isn't proper evidence, even if he did show them. Lie detectors aren't used in real court settings for a variety of reasons. It also doesn't tell him why they are lying, and can even be fooled with the right wording. Matt and Guard had Phoenix fooled, as he technically wasn't the person who committed the actual murder, even if he was the one who set it up. Anyone who's clever enough with their words is going over Phoenix's head, like how Linny didn't technically lie about his past, he just didn't include that detail. Or here, where Marcel spoke very little in the details of exactly what happened. But to get back on track, whether going with Navia or the Traveler, he isn't really helping. If he goes with Navia, there isn't really anything he can do to speed up the case, as there's no solid evidence until the Traveler gets back, and Navia already knew what she was doing at the time. And if he goes with the Traveler, his lack of combat skills in that place is going to make him more of a liability than an advantage. Meanwhile, Velma at least can offer another keen eye for puzzles and investigating while being able to defend herself from any threats. Next important step would be the Fortress of Meripede, going to jail and investigating the inner workings. This is a balancing quest, sort of. getting credits for working so that you can eat, and even skip work if you have enough of them. This is a very easy case of them just splitting the work. Whether Velma or the Traveler does the physical labor where the other one investigates, figuring out the 3 secret rules, breaking them, and then connecting why they exist. They have 45 days to do this, and frankly that makes it almost impossible to lose any time here. The Traveler solves it with plenty of times and then just doesn't leave despite being able to for the rest of the passing time. The plot doesn't go on until the sentence is up. Still, despite that, if you were to ask who does this better, ultimately Velma is the one built for this kind of investigation. Spotting secret rooms, uncovering people's secret intent, and pulling everything together she needs to explain what happened and why. And after all that's done, again, a problem arises. Why doesn't Phoenix just go home? At this point, weeks have passed at least, and now all they'd be doing is sitting around and enjoying the place. With the cases solved, there's no reason Phoenix wouldn't just dip. Velma at least would still have a whole world she'd love to study and learn about, and again, lack of responsibilities at home. I just don't see him sticking around to get caught up in the rest, and if he does, the next part is probably going to get him killed. Again. They need to travel to the ancient ruins, where he could easily die on the way because of the wild creatures, then getting inside where more creatures could kill him, and then the bridge collapsing, and then the other stairs which also collapsed, which both definitely could kill him, just to go where there are more creatures which also could again kill him. Assuming he survives all that somehow, that's still a lot of lost time just trying to keep him safe. Finally though, setting up the trap to bring Farina to court and get the secret that she's been hiding from all of us. She's not the Hydro Archon. Setting up a trap? Gee whiz. I wonder who has experience doing that sort of thing. Once they bring her to court, it's a straight shot to the end. Proving the truth of who she is already is about as fast as it's getting. They already have the proof before the case starts, there's no speeding it up. And Phoenix isn't getting the secret out of her earlier either. If she didn't tell the Traveler, someone she's familiar with that's also from a different world, there's no way that Phoenix is getting it. With everything in line, Farina is proven not to be the true Archon. But there's one last thing. One last fight. One against the all-devouring Narwhal, where Phoenix could die.
Alright, I get it!
Altogether, when it comes to solving the case and ripping off Farina's mask, both are valid, but Velma is the only true expert.
Maybe a bit of a bookworm, but I've got a wild side too. That's why my favorite part of Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase was shooting in the prehistoric jungle. It really brought out the animal in me.
Hold it! Sorry, Butter, but I think you'll find Phoenix Wright to be more of a challenge than you first thought. And who better to explain why than the guy who named himself after the Ace Attorney series? That's right, it's me, GalacticAttorney. You might know me from my YouTube channel where I talk about Death Battle, or from my other online writing projects. Or maybe you even know me from my real magnum opus, being half of the duo that gave Shao Kahn his legendary and very justified win over Black Panther on GGM Lightspeed. I don't know how I'm ever gonna top that if I'm being honest. I may have peaked already. But while I let Butter do most of the talking there, this is a very different set of circumstances. I refuse to let this foolish fool foolishly blaspheme against one of the most iconic attorneys in all of pop culture, especially by arguing that he'd be less helpful to the Traveler than Velma. The difference between what Phoenix and Velma can do to help in the Fontaine Archon questline is as blatant as the difference between ladders and stepladders. And let me tell you, that difference is very much in favor of ol' Righto. For my opening statement, let me put one of your more persistent arguments to bed straight away. No, Phoenix isn't just going to leave after the first trial wraps up. He's been dragged into another universe. He can't exactly hop on the next Aquabus headed for Japanifornia and just peace out. Sure, Velma would probably be inclined to hang around just for the mysteries at hand, but Phoenix isn't some selfish for-profit attorney who doesn't care about the people around him. In Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, he decided to stick around in Labyrinthia both to help Layton investigate their new world and to help Espella, a girl he had no attachment to outside of defending her in court on 2 occasions. He'd want to stay in Fontaine for similar reasons, with the obvious plus that going with a traveler from another world is probably his best bet at finding a way home. Therefore, he'd logically be staying with the Traveler throughout most of the quest line. And as the Traveler is more than capable of fending off opponents while protecting less combat-oriented members of their traveling party, a lot of your arguments for Phoenix just dying along the way would be rendered moot. Now, with that out of the way, allow me to point out the most obvious advantage in Wright's corner. He will absolutely be a better asset in court than Velma. The majority of the acts in Fontaine's Archon quest line, 3 out of 5 to be precise, are focused on trials and the mysterious cases at the centers of each one. These include the mysterious murder during Linny's magic show, a years-old cold case surrounding primordial seawater, which can dissolve Fontainians on contact, and a trial to determine the true identity of the Hydro Archon. The Traveler's side of these trials is either represented by them and Paimon or by Navia in the second case, since it's a case that involves her late father. While both the Traveler and Navia are able to argue their cases well in these instances, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Phoenix would be able to take their places in these trials and pursue justice far more effectively. You might think that would be hard for him, since Fontaine's legal system isn't the same as the one he's used to practicing under, but that's not going to be a problem for him at all. Wright has been a courtroom legend for over a decade, and even when he was disbarred for 7 years, he was still studying legal systems around the world. Not only that, but he's been thrown into situations where he's had to adapt to other legal systems on short notice several times. He dove into the hostile courtroom of Kurain with no idea of what he was getting himself into, and in the Professor Layton crossover game, he not only argued a case in front of a British court, but he did the same in Labyrinthia while recovering from having his memories overwritten. And every single time, he came out on top in the end. His talent at the attorney's bench is ingrained in his very being, so once he's up to speed on Fontaine's courtroom proceedings and the cases at hand, I have no doubts that Phoenix will be an invaluable asset during these trials. Conversely, Velma is far less familiar with courts in general. Most of the time, once she and the gang unmask a villain and hand them over to the cops, they wash their hands of the matter and move on to the next mystery, having nothing to do with whatever fair trial the criminals they catch may face. The Scooby Gang's only participated in trials a few times, and despite her smarts, none of these instances really went that well for Velma. And don't even get me started on her poor performance testifying as a witness on Harvey Birdman. I don't doubt that her sleuthing skills would be helpful in reaching the truth of these cases, but the Traveler and Paimon are already more than capable of piecing that together themselves. Plus, Velma only ever explains her deductions after the bad guy's been caught. There's nothing to refute at that point, so she doesn't ever have to worry about convincing people that she's correct, which is what's required in a courtroom. Meanwhile, Phoenix offers expertise and natural skill when it comes to arguing his case in front of a judge and a jury of his peers, something that Velma just can't compete with. This advantage only gets stronger when you consider Velma and Phoenix's personalities and how they would impact their odds of success. Velma's not really a people person, and she'll freely admit that more social members of the gang like Daphne are the ones who get them close to individuals relevant to a mystery. One of her signature traits is her attitude, with Velma's knack for sarcasm and sass being fully visible in places like the Mystery Incorporated show.
What do you want with us, shovel lips?
Do not mock me. I have eldritch blood.
And sometimes I have a chick mustache. Is there a point to this?
This side of her personality is so prominent, in fact, that it's literally her auto combo in multiverses. This might make her a fan favorite among the gang, but it also makes her very abrasive and prone to insulting other people if she's had enough of them. This is compounded by her brainiac nature, which can lead her to over-explain things and talk down to others who aren't her intellectual equals. These factors will make it harder for her to go with the flow and get along with important characters in Fontaine's storyline, like Nervalette, Chief Justice of Fontaine, Linny and Lynette, the twin magicians who are key figures even after their trial, and Farina, the star of Fontaine and the central figure of its apocalyptic prophecy. These problems would only spiral when it comes time for the Traveler to investigate Child's disappearance in the Fortress of Meripede. That's literally a giant underwater prison full of convicted criminals, plenty of whom are shady characters who are just out for themselves. Velma's immaturity would completely inhibit her ability to keep her attitude in check when talking with these inmates, which would in turn make it way harder for the Traveler to investigate the hidden rules of the fortress and find out how Child escaped. She'd probably be better suited to piecing the clues together once the Traveler has gotten them, but with foreign factors like Melazine perception in play, I doubt she'd be able to contribute much more than what the Traveler can already do on their own. As for Phoenix, he has none of Velma's baggage when it comes to personality. He's very earnest and down to earth, always willing to meet other people at their level and treat them with respect. Not only that, but he's a great communicator, proving skilled at perceiving how others are feeling and tailoring his behavior accordingly. He's a master of using his words to steer conversations toward his interests and get information out of people, which will be helpful when it comes to interrogating witnesses and moving the story along. Speaking of which, let's move on to how these two would help with investigating the mysteries at play in this story. Your natural assumption might be to think that Velma would dominate in this aspect. After all, searching for clues and uncovering the truth is what she's all about. But I actually think that Phoenix would be just as competent there, if not more so in this scenario. Despite this not being the norm for defense attorneys, when Phoenix takes up a case, he's very hands-on. He visits the crime scene, gathers evidence, and interviews relevant individuals himself, so he's plenty experienced in investigation. Plus, Nick is a master of thinking outside the box, noticing seemingly irrelevant details, and solving convoluted crimes during intense trials, having basically built his reputation as the turnabout terror on that ability. As for Velma, she frequently relies on prior knowledge to allow her to contextualize the clues she finds when Mystery Inc. travels, something she obviously wouldn't be able to do here. She doesn't deal too well with not being smart enough for any given situation either, so she'd likely drag the Traveler down by trying to study and understand Tevat instead of helping with the mysteries at hand. And while Tevat might not be a medieval wasteland with no technology to speak of, it definitely doesn't have anything like the internet or places to charge devices like laptops and cell phones. Velma's fairly reliant on digital methods when she needs to gather information in the field, so it'll be an adjustment for her to have to rely on more old-fashioned means of investigation. Meanwhile, Phoenix has no such reliance on technology for when he builds his cases. There's only one tool that's indispensable to him: the Magatama. For the uninformed, Phoenix's Magatama was given to him by Maya Fae and imbued with spiritual power by Pearl Fae. With it, he can see a person's psyche locks whenever they hide secrets from him, and by breaking them, he can compel said person to tell the truth. Don't be fooled by the downplaying that's going on. Phoenix's ability to logic his way through lies and contradictions means the indication of a lie alone is more than enough. Just imagine how useful something like that would be to the Traveler. It would erase all doubt about Liddy's involvement in the initial murder case, and in the second one, he could sniff out Marcel's lies about his involvement with the framing of Navia's father in no time. He'd even be able to tell in one fell swoop that Farina is not the true Hydro Archon, because the second he asks her and she says she is, boom! Psyche locks everywhere. The trial against Farina would be a lot simpler with the Magatama being used to test her sincerity. And while it's been argued that this wouldn't fly in court, the Magatama is far more than a simple polygraph, which isn't used as a lie detector for its own unrelated reasons. In the final case of Trials and Tribulations, Edgeworth is given the Magatama by Phoenix, and holding it allows him to see psyche locks as well. This proves that its power isn't limited to Phoenix alone, so he could let relevant people like the Traveler and Nervalette hold it to prove its authenticity. Keep in mind that Tevat already has one otherworldly individual who wields abilities that others can't. Something like the Magatama would just be more of the same, so I see no reason for anyone to cast doubt on its usefulness. I could keep going, but there's still the second round to get to, so I'll hold off for now. Overall, Phoenix brings so much more to the table when assisting the Traveler. Expertise in the law and courtroom proceedings, an approachable personality that lends itself well to his profession, plenty of experience with hitting the bricks for investigations, and a unique ability to cut through any lies that stand in his way. Velma would certainly be helpful, but when searching for the best, I think you'll agree that going with Phoenix is the right choice.
Your Honor, the defense was born ready.
Jinkies, what part of the word debate didn't you understand? If you honestly think that he's more useful than Velma here, no he's not. The mystery of you believing in Phoenix is one not even I could solve. If we assume that the deity that brought them here won't send them home, fucking dick, it doesn't change the outcome much. First, on the point of combat, I hardly call his inability to fight and chances to die a mute point. Even if Traveler was capable of defending him, shock of the century, that's still slowing them down. The chances of him dying, especially in large crowds, is always a possibility and definitely has an effect. The point shouldn't be entirely dismissed, else I can dismiss Velma's attitude problem with, she's talked to people and held back her snarky remarks. Velma has a clear advantage here and a way to speed things up. Back onto this topic, there's a point in the story where wing gliding is necessary. In the caves, there's a bunch of huge areas that need to be flown across, and it's even made note that when they go here, Navia couldn't go back. Phoenix has no reason to have tried learning how to use them, where Velma has already used very similar things to this. This part would mean that Phoenix would need to go back, and he either would have to have someone escort him back or just go on his own and possibly die. No matter what he did, he's not helping at this part at all. The Magatama isn't flying in court. There's a huge difference between a magical artifact from a different world that nobody can identify its abilities, and a scientifically built device not used just by a community, but a species as a whole. Anyone, and I do mean anyone, can just say that Phoenix makes the Magatama flash when he wants it to. He has no evidence to refute it, and it would take way too long to make it viable in any court. Something like this would likely go against the rules, which if you've seen their cases, they are very by the rules. Even if they could hold it themselves, that doesn't prove what it's actually doing. We also don't have any proof that they have polygraphs, which would make this new concept even more doubtful. Genshin is that weird middle of the state with advanced robots, yet also medieval. But if they ever had such a lie detector, why would the country that literally rules over laws not mention such a device? Speaking of technology, Velma has a preference to use technology, but don't take that like she hasn't researched without it plenty of times. For someone who's been around for so long, there is a lot of situations where she didn't have a computer to research with. Oh wow, Velma, the one constantly researching history, loves books. Who could have guessed? Of course she's going to be able to buckle down on Fontaine's laws in history, especially more than Phoenix could. They both start from ground zero when it comes to knowing the laws here, so he doesn't even have an advantage there. Even with Velma's more snarky personality, this hasn't stopped her from basic communication. The Fortress of Meropide isn't going to be some dark-held secret where these rules are locked away behind the mind of a deranged maniac where you have to walk a tightrope in order to earn their trust and get it out of them. It's just asking some questions around the place. She can talk to people and not be a dick. If she was so incapable of such skills, she wouldn't have friends to begin with. I mean, hell, she's at least dated someone who didn't try and kill her. That's more than Gemini Man can say. But back to the argument, there isn't really a point in this quest where a little smart mouth would be a deterrent. And if you really want to say it could be, Phoenix also tends to be just as sarcastic, especially when dealing with nonsensical characters too. So he'd also be at that kind of risk if you really think it's a problem. Onto one of my bigger points. I don't think Phoenix helping court is that important. Most of the cases are straightforward once they have the evidence. There aren't any goose chases like during the Ace Attorney courts. Putting Phoenix in Traveler and Navia's position wouldn't make much of a difference, as he'd essentially just say the same thing. Also, remember, the Ortrice Mécanique de l'Anis Cardinal won't come to an outcome until they brought forth the evidence. If Phoenix replaces Navia during the second case, he can't push an early outcome from the Ortrice Mécanique de l'Anis Cardinal, as he still needs the evidence that the Traveler went to go get. So it's just waiting around until they get back to prove to the Ortrice Mécanique de l'Anis Cardinal. Okay, I'll stop. The only real thing they need to do is be smart enough to show their case, which if Traveler could do it, a crime-solving veteran like Velma absolutely could do it too. What's more important than the court proceedings themselves is getting the evidence to prove their case in the first place, making Velma's expertise way more important. And if you honestly think that Velma's going to get distracted from the mystery at hand because of studying other things in Tibet, you don't know Velma. She's a nutcase for mystery and knows how to stay on track. She'd be excited to learn and would place this excitement in solving these cases. If anything, this gives her more of an incentive to actually get ahead on everything. There are points in the story where they have free time, where Velma would be free to do research that would actually come in handy later. A lot of this mystery is just leaning in Velma's favor too. Tablets, ancient mysteries, prophecies. Don't get me wrong, Phoenix is well versed, but not in these kinds of cases. Much like Phoenix in court, this is Velma's bread and butter. but it's far more important as where Phoenix is stalling in court, Velma is actually out there solving it. So check your banners and be sure to save your primos, because if there's anyone here worth C6ing to help speed up your time in Fontaine, it's the glasses-wearing, orange sweater smart-mouth genius from Crystal Cove. And that's no mystery.
Lower your finger! Right now! I'm pointing out your untruth. There's a glaring contradiction.
It seems there's yet another twisted samurai standing between Phoenix, Wright, and victory today. Nevertheless, I will believe in my side and argue until the bitter end. Let's kick off this second half by cross-examining some of your earlier claims. Yes, Velma has shown that she can fight plenty of times, but there's a big difference between being capable of fighting and being a fighter. Whenever the monster of the day shows up, Velma's just as quick to run as the rest of the Scooby Gang, even when the threat's way less imposing than Cthulhu with a beak. So the Traveler would probably be protecting her just as much as they'd be protecting Phoenix. Speaking of the evil entity, while Velma and the gang were able to defeat it, they were only able to do that because the goated power of friendship meant it couldn't just eat them alive. Even then, they were still physically outmatched by its vastly inferior minions, so any fighting prowess Velma has clearly can't do much against blatantly stronger enemies. Meanwhile, I can show some decisive evidence that Phoenix could at least defend himself here. In the Ace Attorney anime, Phoenix can conjure large gusts of wind with a point of his finger, which could be used to keep assorted foes like treasure hoarders and Clockwork Mecha at bay. In fact, you could even say this elemental manipulation would be more helpful than Velma's more traditional fighting style, since he could use it to trigger swirl reactions with hydro and electro attacks used by the Traveler. You might object by saying that this only happens in the anime and not the games, but Velma's being composited across the Scooby Gang's many different iterations for this debate, and when you consider how widely varied she is as a character across those different versions, a faithful retelling of Phoenix's story with minor alterations feels very reasonable by comparison. But even if you disagree with that, I'm no less confident in my case. There's not much combat in Fontaine's Archon quests anyway, so any advantage there would be next to irrelevant. And when it comes to exploring dangerous areas like the ruins that contextualize Fontaine's prophecy, not only is Phoenix more than athletic enough to at least keep up with the Traveler, but he's actually much tougher than you'd think. I mean, this is the guy who fell from a burning bridge into a raging river and emerged with only a cold. Falling down some collapsing stairs would be a walk in the park for Nick by comparison. On the flip side, Velma might be a seasoned explorer of treacherous areas, but we all know that she's helpless if she loses her glasses, which is very likely to happen in dire circumstances. She's lost them through means as banal as tripping over a rock before, and one time they were even stolen right out from under her nose. It's not hard to see how she'd end up putting herself in danger. Or maybe it is hard to see if you're as careless with your prescription lenses as Miss Dinkley. You claim that Velma's attitude wouldn't be that much of a hindrance in the Fortress of Meropide, but I think you're selling the prisoners there short. Literally the first person the Traveler meets down there is a two-faced, self-interested tour guide who's only nice to them to get on Wriothesley's good side, and it's not like the rest of the inmates are much better. Velma has shown in the past that she doesn't tend to hold her attitude back if she finds a person suspicious, like with Bo, the gardener in Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island.
Why do you keep treating me like I'm a suspect?
Because you are!
The Traveler would have to constantly be reining her in if she's allowed to talk with these prisoners, lest she turn away critical sources of information and make the investigation take even longer. I'm not gonna say that Velma wouldn't get along with anybody in Fontaine, but the relationships she makes with people she crosses paths with during mysteries outside of Crystal Cove tend to be fairly shallow. She's accustomed to being able to lean on the rest of the Scooby Gang for deeper relationships and to make up for her shortcomings, so being deprived of her usual ensemble will be another challenge for her. Meanwhile, for better or worse, Phoenix usually ends up forging a deeper understanding of just about everyone he crosses paths with. So long as they're not named Wendy Oldbag anyway. People tend to either form a begrudging respect for him because of how devoted he is to his ideals, or actually come around to his side and become allies of his. Who needs a girlfriend when your childhood best friend turned courtroom rival is harboring some unnecessary feelings for you? Evidence is far from the only thing getting examined when these two pull late nights at the office. As for Velma's researching methods, of course she's used books instead of computers before. She's been around since before computers were household items, so she didn't exactly have a wealth of alternative options early on in her history. But nowadays, in modern Scooby-Doo stories, advanced technologies are what she defaults to most of the time, so my point stands that she's going to have to adjust to not being able to use them at all. And for as confident as you are that she'd be great at diving deep into Fontaine's laws and history, are you sure you want to use that as a point? Where is Velma gonna find enough time to sit down in the Palais Mermonia and study every frivolous law and every unimportant detail in Fontaine's centuries of history without keeping the traveler from going elsewhere and furthering the story? It's either that or Velma gets left behind and doesn't get to help with a sizable chunk of the quest line, and neither option is favorable for her odds at winning this scenario. I mentioned polygraph tests not because Fontaine has something equivalent to them, but because you mentioned them not being used in court and drew a parallel with the Magatama in that way. Polygraphs aren't used in real-world courtrooms because they measure physical changes that indicate one's emotions, which isn't reliable for proving that someone is lying. The Magatama works completely differently in that it shows the holder a person's spiritual heart, so to compare the two would be an apples and oranges situation. And on the subject of the Magatama, what was that you said earlier?
Anyone, and I do mean anyone, can just say that Phoenix makes the Magatama flash when he wants it to. He has no evidence to refute it, and it would take way too long to make it viable in any court.
Objection! That claim is blatantly false, and it's easy to see why. Vision bearers have repeatedly been shown to be capable of sensing abnormal energies in their environment, whether it's elemental in nature or not. For example, Arlecchino was able to sense Farina's curse of immortality just by being next to her, and more to my point, Hu Tao can sense the presence of spirits. As I said before, the Magatama is powered by spiritual energy, so any one of the many vision bearers in this storyline could easily verify that it has a special power just by examining it. The fact that it's translucent means there's no speculating that it's some mechanical doohickey either. And really, is an artifact that can reveal secrets and lies something that Tevat would be shocked by? This world is about as fantastical as you can get, and the Traveler has absolutely seen more outlandish things during their, well, travels. And while we're on the topic, Velma wouldn't be very helpful to the Traveler if she, you know, just doesn't accept the reality of how things work in Tevat. Despite being the most scientific member of Mystery Inc., Velma's way of thinking is very rigid and overly rational. She's typically the one who's the most insistent on ghosts not being real, and in Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo, she spends most of the film in complete denial of the pumpkin monsters chasing them being real, searching for any explanation that was quote-unquote logical enough for her. Sure, they did turn out to be fake, but it just goes to show that the many truly supernatural villains in Scooby-Doo's history weren't enough to make Velma discard her skeptical thought process. Oh, but when something is undeniably paranormal, she can handle it, right? Well, let me show you how she responded to seeing real magic in Scooby-Doo and the Goblin King.
Maybe Krudsky's magic is real after all.
But that's impossible. Rational mind. Shutting down.
Ooh!
I think you see what I'm driving at. Aspects of Genshin Impact frequently defy scientific explanation, like summoning weapons out of thin air and manipulating the elements with visions. But especially relevant here are the effects of primordial seawater on Fontainians, where Phoenix would just accept what he sees and follow the lead of those who know more about the situation. Velma would be wasting time trying to figure out how that Maison Gardiennage member disappeared in front of everyone's eyes, assuming that she doesn't completely shut down at the sight. In either case, she'd end up being more of a liability than a helping hand. You fought valiantly, Butter, but no matter how many arguments you bring to the table, I believe everyone sees the truth of the matter now. I came from the depths of hell to do battle with you, and I've made it crystal clear that Fontaine needs an ace attorney more than it needs any meddling kids. In the end,
You're gonna learn this is where Phoenix Wright belongs. Now! Objection!
Now that G is done trying his best, be sure to comment down below what points you have. The gang and I will be sure to investigate them closely.
Court may be adjourned for now, but you definitely won't want to miss when we reconvene. Subscribe to Galaxy Video to see Part 2 and our other videos when they come out. Also, consider supporting our Patreon to see our stuff early and so I can afford Maya's burger budget. See you next time!